London, 1888. We step into London, 1888, a city that calls itself the heart of an empire, gilded in light, yet rotting in shadow. In the West End, the new electric lamps blaze over wide boulevards. Carriages halt before the theater, ladies descend in silken gowns, fireworks scatter like diamonds above their hats. Gentlemen laugh through the haze of cigar smoke, glasses clink, music swells, applause thunders. London parades in its evening dress, dazzling Europe with its wealth. But only a few streets away, the lights vanish. I turn east, into Whitechapel, where the fog devours each gas lamp flame. By day it is brutal, by night it is a predator. The cobblestones sweat sewage and gin. Inside the pubs, chairs scrape, coughs rasp, voices rise in angry bursts. On the corners, women wait in wrinkled skirts, tired eyes fixed on chance, the faintest hope of surviving until dawn. Mary and Nichols, Bucks Row, August 31st. Deeper into Whitechapel, a crowd gathers at the end of Bucks Row. Policemen carry gas lamps, their lights swinging. I push forward, then I see a body collapsed against a wet brick wall. Eyes open, staring, clothes disheveled. Across her throat, slashes so deep they silence the air itself. A dark pool spreads across the stones, swallowing light, as cold as the night around us. Officers kneel, scribbling in silence, hands trembling on their notebooks. Behind them, the crowd presses closer. Women sob, drunks vomit against the wall. A child is pulled away though its eyes remain fixed on the body. Her name, Marian Nichols. Hours ago, she was still wandering Bucks Row, searching for customers. Now only this, an empty shell. The silence grows so heavy that the scratch of a pen sounds like a knife tearing flesh. And for a fleeting moment, I feel watched, eyes hidden somewhere in the dark. The body is covered, carried away. The crowd refuses to leave. Whispers spread like smoke. A madman stalking women. A butcher gone insane. A demon in human skin. None of it certain. Only one truth. This is the beginning. Whitechapel has awakened into a nightmare. A nightmare with a name, Jack the Ripper. Elizabeth Stride, Dorset Street, September 30th. The last night of September presses down like a coffin lid. Fog clings low, too tired to rise. On Dorset Street, the crowd has already gathered in silence. A woman lies by the gate, clothes torn, body twisted. In her throat, a shallow cut, blood not yet spread wide. Nothing else. The scene feels broken, unfinished. Police shine their lamps again and again, trading uneasy glances, erasing and rewriting notes. It looks like interruption. Someone startled him, forced him to flee before the ritual was complete. The crowd murmurs. A witness swears she saw the victim with a man in a bowler hat. An old woman says she heard hooves pounding. But all of it is fragments, thin and brittle. Then, a whistle cuts the night. Boots pound the cobbles. Gas lamps quiver in running hands. I am swept with the others toward Mitre Square. And I know, Stride's death is only half the horror. The other half waits ahead. Catherine Eddowes, Mitre Square, September 30th. In Mitre Square, another crowd. Another body. But this one freezes the street. Officers cover their faces, pins scrape in haste. The air itself reeks of iron. Her name, Catherine Eddowes. Bits of evidence scatter like meaningless confetti. A torn cloth, coins, a broken ring. Nothing solid. Yet the violence says more than words. This was not just murder. It was signature. By morning, the newspapers howl. Whitechapel monster strikes again. 2 victims in one night. Newsboys scream themselves hoarse. Crowds snatch the pages. The press twists rumor into fact, feeding London a legend. Jack does not kill alone. He is carried by ink, by headlines, by fear. The arrival of the detective. On a cold morning at Whitechapel Station, a new face arrives. Not a local constable, an investigator from the heart of the city. His eyes, sharp as glass. His stride, heavy with certainty. Hope gathers around him like breath and frost. I follow in silence. He spreads the files. Nichols, Chapman, Stride, Eddowes. Ink scrawls, rough maps. On the city chart, he links the streets. Bucks Row, Hanbury, Burner, Mitre. A spiderweb takes shape, Whitechapel its center. The witness statements are fractured. A tall man in a bowler hat, a foreign accent, a butcher's frame, a doctor's hands. Every voice tells a different face. Jack wears them all. The detective does not flinch. He writes down what others ignored: a scratch on Hanbury's gate, a torn scrap at Mitre Square, fragments dismissed by others. He hoards like gold dust. For a moment, I believe the shadow might finally take shape. But then, contradictions blur the outline. Evidence dissolves. The circle widens. Innocence dragged into suspicion. Whitechapel stays silent. Silent and smiling. Following the detective. The small room at Whitechapel Station burned with gaslight. On the table, notes, maps, and scraps of evidence sprawled like pieces of a maddening puzzle. The new detective stood with arms crossed, eyes sweeping slowly across every detail. I lingered behind him, hearing the tension hum like a violin string stretched to breaking. His pen traced red dots into a web: Bucks Row, Hanbury Street, Burner Street, Mitre Square. The lines converged on a narrow patch of Whitechapel. A red circle bled across the paper like a wound. Here. He's here. The pieces began to align. Same window of time, after midnight, before dawn. Same geography, alleys, narrow cuts, paths unseen. Same skill, cuts clean and swift, a hand long practiced with blades. Same prey, poor women, often seen near taverns. The detective's eye sharpened. A shadowy portrait emerged. A man not wealthy, but deft with knives. A doctor, a medic, or a butcher. Someone who lived in Whitechapel, hidden among the crowd. The air grew thick. I heard the scratch of pens, the breath of anxious constables. We were close. The door burst open. An officer stumbled in, pale, breath ragged. He needed no words. Terror in his eyes was enough. Another body. The room erupted. Chairs scraped. Boots pounded stone. I was swept into the rush, running through fog. The careful reasoning on the map shattered with each step. Did Jack know we were closing in? Was this his mockery, his taunt? We turned into a narrow street, lanterns smearing in the mist. When the scene unfolded, I understood. The red circle, the neat deductions, all torn apart, thrown back into chaos. Jack had moved first. A new murder. We pushed through wet, frozen streets. Whistles shrieked through the fog. I followed the detective, breath quick in coal-smoked air. At an alley near Mitre Square, the crowd had gathered. Gas lamps flickered over faces drained of blood. Against a damp wall, another woman lay crumpled, her dress rumpled. One arm hanging limp on stone. Pins trembled. Officers whispered in taut voices. The detective crouched, lifting a torn scrap of cloth, studying stains before tucking it into an evidence pouch. His other hand brushed fresh scratches along the brick, as though listening to the wall itself. I marked the pattern. Again, a poor woman alone in the night. Again, a narrow alley where light faltered. Again, a swift hand, clean, vanishing as if air itself opened to let him through. But something was different. Footprints pressed deeper, larger, more careless, or deliberate. The detective circled it in his notebook, strokes heavy as nails. He left us a message. Rumors swelled at our backs. A laugh in the alley. A shadow flitting past like wind. A tall figure in a bowler hat, vanishing at the corner. Each story tangled into noise. Yet the detective's gaze only burned brighter, as though he had caught the hinge of the lock. The folded map in his hand showed the same orbit. Not random strikes, but a fixed circuit. This was his territory. He wasn't just in Whitechapel. He belonged to it. A predator looping through his lair, waiting for prey to stumble into reach. The body was carried off. Fog swallowed the alley whole. The detective closed his notebook, eyes fixed on the emptiness where she had lain. Without words, I read the thought in his stare. We're closer now. Closer, and still dancing to his tune. The strategy room. The meeting room swelled with smoke. Faces grim under the low ceiling. On the table, torn cloth, damp boot prints, a handful of coins. The detective stood at the board. He flattened the map, pen striking points. Bucks Row, Hanbury, Burner, Mitre, Dorset Street. 5 red marks, like drops of blood, enclosing Whitechapel's heart. Not chance, he said without saying. His pen carved the pattern. Alleys, cul-de-sacs, darkness. Jack avoided light. He moved where 2 steps could erase him. The cloth passed hand to hand. Cheap coat fabric, laborer's wear. The boot print, thick-soled, military or butcher's. Voices argued. A doctor's blade, a butcher's force, a soldier's discipline. Suspicion spun like a wheel, yet always circled back. A man of Whitechapel, knife-skilled, alley-born. Victim file snapped open. Nichols, broke, forced to street. Chapman, frail, destitute, alone. Stride, immigrant, work unstable. Eddowes, drunk, just released. Kelly, youngest, rooming alone. The pattern blazed. Poor women, isolated, accessible in darkness. Not money, not rage. Ritual. The detective underlined one phrase. Repetition of act, repetition of pleasure. The room hushed. The web was closing. And beneath that silence, a colder truth. The closer the circle drew, the deadlier the game became. Jack wasn't fleeing. He was playing. And somehow, he already knew our next move. The pub, rumors in the ale. The tavern stank of beer and sweat. A scuffle had just erupted. Chairs scraped. Curses in rough Whitechapel slang. A drunk sprawled on the floor, then slurred. A doctor had vanished into thin air. Heads turned. Voices rose. One man said the doctor often prowled for women, then vanished. Another swore he'd fled debts. An old woman muttered about Flower and Dean lodging house, strange tenants, filthy clothes. No one knew their trade. Then another, he'd seen a figure cut through alleys like a shadow, gone before anyone blinked. Nods followed, murmurs layered, stories swelling with each retelling. To the drinkers, just pub talk. To the detective, it was blood on the trail. He wrote 3 lines. A missing doctor. A stranger at Flower and Dean. A man who knew every alley. Notebook snapped shut. His pen tapped the table. The pub forgot by morning. But he would not. After the pub, we left into gray fog, roofs dripping cold. Behind us, laughter and curses still rattled the tavern's beams. Ahead, only the detective's measured stride. He opened his notebook under the wavering lamp. One stroke scratched out missing doctor. Joined to Annie Chapman's file. She was often seen outside field clinics. If that doctor vanished the night she died, coincidence or seam? Next page, new line, lodger at Flower and Dean. A warren of filth and shadows. Elizabeth Stride once lived nearby, sometimes begging for chores. Another thread drawn. Last line, man of alleys. The map spread open. Bucks Row, Hanbury, Burner, Mitre, all knotted together by hidden cuts. No main road, no light. Only paths a local would know in his bones. The detective stopped beneath a lamp. Half his face drowned in shadow. Files shuffled in his hand. Nichols, killed in a narrow street near lodging houses. Chapman, in a backyard, close to immigrant quarter. Stride and Eddowes, within an hour of each other, both with escape routes. His pencil circled Flower and Dean and the surrounding maze. The line was dark, final, like striking the heart of a spider web. My own pulse raced. For the first time, the circle no longer stretched across the city. It shrank, from thousands of faces to a single patch of darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, I imagined him, watching from a window, smiling. The slaughterhouse, where blood is ordinary. South Whitechapel reeked of blood. The slaughterhouse floor slick with fat, blades gleamed on hooks. Butchers in stained smocks eyed police warily. The detective walked the chopping tables, noting technique. Quick, sure cuts, work of practiced hands. Then he frowned. Too rough, too heavy. Not the cold precision carved into Whitechapel's dead. I stepped back, letting the stench wash over me. Here, blood and knives were daily routine. But Jack was not here. The abandoned clinic, where the doctor vanished. The clinic was a ruin. Peeling paint, hinges whining. Locals said the doctor had disappeared weeks ago. The air still faint with disinfectant. Bottles toppled on shelves. A wooden operating table scarred with stains. Cabinets creaked open. Scalpels, suture knives. Sharp, exact, tools that matched the victim's wounds. But the doctor himself? Gone. Some whispered he'd moved. Others, he'd fled debts. No one knew. I stared at the empty table. For a breath I saw him there, polishing blades in lamplight before vanishing into the night. And a chill ran up my spine. Flower and Dean were the dark lives. The Flower and Dean lodging house was suffocating. Worm-eaten stairs keened underfoot, mold spidered across damp walls. A sour reek clung to the air. Bodies packed into cubby rooms. Coughs. Infants crying. Long, tired sighs braided into one sound. Doors were knocked one by one. I slipped away. Mouths swore they knew nothing. One room stood bare, splintered bed, stale rot in the floorboards. The detective stooped and lifted a smudged strip of black cloth, turned it under gaslight. Same weave we'd seen at the last scene. His notebook stamped a red verdict. Flower and Dean equals hot zone. Out in the lane, my pulse still hammered in my ears. Here, anyone could be Jack. Every passing shadow, every door nudged shut felt like a secret swallowing itself. Scotland Yard, the meeting. Jack's silence had lasted weeks. Enough for the city to breathe and fear in the same breath. Inside the wood-paneled room, the air was as thick as smoke and paper glue. Uniforms filled the table. Morning papers lay in stacks, headlines screaming police powerless. Knuckles drummed wood. Cold stares flicked to the wall map. A throat cleared like gravel. A broadsheet snapped shut as if someone meant to tear it in two. The detective didn't move. His hand tightened around the notebook. His eyes lingered on a few italic lines, and I understood. The press had him strung up on a thread. Inside the briefing, how the room turns. The room stank of tobacco and ink. Today's papers stretched like a red smear. Every page bellowed Jack the Ripper, each trying to outgore the last. Pencils slashed through baseless claims. Graphite smeared into bruises on the margins. A hoarse voice read out street talk, weighing gossip against fact. Under one gaslight, glances met and slid away. The missing doctor, the Southside butcher. Whispers even brushed the royals. Shards of rumor grated against each other, never forming a picture. At the far end sat the detective, silent. His pen twirled between his fingers. His gaze skimmed headlines, then halted on one italic line. A witness said a stranger washed a knife at the public pump. That detail wasn't in any official file. In that beat, I saw him decide to catch Jack, go where rumors are born, the newsroom. The newsroom, a quiet war. The door shut on the clatter of presses. Ink and smoke braided into a heavy fog. Yellow light washed the editor's flushed face. Sweat purled at his hairline. He sank into leather, a slab of a man barricading the desk. Fat fingers drummed a victory tattoo on a proof. The test cover screamed, "Jack mocks all London." The detective didn't speak. His black coat pooled like night across the floor. He slid a sheet free and carved a hard line through the sensational lies. Steel nib on paper sounded like a blade. The editor's eyes narrowed. A half-smile twitched. His message was plain. Every corpse means 1,000 papers. The slower the police, the richer the press. No one talked, but the air thickened. Outside, the press hummed. Inside, two wills locked. One side wielded public fury, happy to sell truth for profit. The other wielded patience like iron, waiting for a slip. Tap, tap, tap. The detective's pen against the desk beat down the editor's smug rhythm. The fox's smile sagged, then re-stiffened behind a veil of smoke, but worry flashed in his eyes. This wasn't an exchange of information. It was a chess game, and this board never ended after one match. The newsroom, the price of a secret. Lamplight pooled over proofs, the red ink bright as fresh blood. The editor reclined, eyes sharp as a blade. His pinky worried a gold ring, the tick of a man calculating odds. No words, but the posture said it all. The paper held the goods, and the police could pay or walk. The press didn't just record events, it bent the crowd around them. One nod from him could write a new script for the city. The detective stood his ground. His gaze fell to a half-hidden envelope lodged in the stack. He knew what was inside. Instead of reaching, he opened his notebook and wrote a single, flat line. A refusal, no commerce in blood. The room was so tight I could hear my own heartbeat. The editor's crooked smile widened. Sure, he'd taken the point. His fingers beat the desk, each thud like a mallet on a coffin lid. The detective turned. His coat hissed over the boards. The door clicked shut, leaving ink and a ragged laugh behind. The hallway, the quiet hand. Gaslight stretched our shadows along the damp wall. It looked like a loss, until a thin hand brushed the detective's elbow. A wiry clerk, eyes bright, uncertain, palmed him a slim envelope, nodded once, and said nothing. I knew him. The dockside brawl survivor the detective had once dragged out of death's way. Inside were 3 shards. A rough copy of a letter mailed to the paper, bragging about rubber overshows to hide tracks. A hurried note. A woman followed to her lodging door. A narrow strip of black cloth, held back for a splashy addition. No instructions. No plea. I understood anyway. A debt repaid. Also a soft bargain for future exclusives. The detective neither nodded nor shook his head. He closed the notebook, slipped the envelope away, and walked straight through the sliver of light. The real win wasn't in that smoke-heavy office. It was here, in the dark, from someone who remembered. Mary Jane Kelly, Dorset Street, November 9th, 1888, the pivotal scene. Dorset Street hit like cold through bone. Wet air clawed down collars and stole breath. They call it London's worst street. This morning, the title felt like prophecy. Roof tiles sweated, windows filmed over, lines sagged across the yard, rags shivering on the string. Somewhere a bucket rose on a public well and stopped, as if the whole street remembered it should make no sound today. Boots hammered the stone in a tight drum roll. I kept to the detective's back. His coat cut a black seam through the gray fog. Room 13 loomed, mold-stained door, lazy latch, a windowsill smudged with soot. Knuckles had rapped long with no reply. One shoulder drove forward. The hinges screamed thin as metal on bone. The room's smell hit us like a wall. A constable staggered, clutching his chest. The detective drew a breath, pushed a lamp ahead. Yellow fire skimmed the low ceiling. A torn curtain, a three-legged chair on its side. On the floor, a cheap bottle rolled, ticking glass against brick like teeth grinding in the night. The bed hunched in the corner. Light laid a motionless shape upon it. The bed-frame skeleton threw long bars up the wall. For a long first beat, no one breathed. Words would fail this. I wrote only, "A storm of knives has passed through this room. The bed is the eye of it." The detective stood at the bed foot a long time. His wrist tensed around the lamp. His shadow stretched thin and blade-like up the wall. He handed the light off and began to circle, slow, steady, as if counting the heartbeat of silence. The windowsill, an oddly thick soot. The latch half set, as if someone opened for air, then closed in haste. A white comma of candle wax fixed in place. The wood's edge polished smooth where a hand often lingered. He had stood here. He had opened that window, at least once. In the gutter, a gray fiber, cheap wool or thread. The detective lifted it with tweezers, tilted it under the flame. Bedside table. A dry heel of bread, an empty gin. A faint drag mark in the wood, as if something had been pulled and set down. A chipped teacup offset on the ring. The liquid inside still held a ghost of warmth. The smoke was wrong for this building. Thin, dry. Not the gutter reek the lodgers smoked, but a sharper oriental leaf, cured bright. Not sold on this block. By the hearth, ash lay fine and deep. He flicked it with a stick, charred paper corners unfurled, rag fibers ripped lengthwise, ink bled to gray. Someone burned papers last night, long enough for the ash to cool, quick enough to leave damp edges unconsumed. Note, burned in haste, erased the script, curated his own scene. Near the bedfoot, a boot mark. Not complete, but enough. Big, blocky, cross-hatched like heavy soles built for long shifts. The wet stone had softened the rim, as if rubber overshoes smeared the edges, like the line in the newsroom letter. In the tread clung a hair-fine red grit, brick dust from walls or a close-cut alley. He shaved a fleck into an evidence fold. By the door jamb, a thin scratch at hip height, pale and fresh, as if a blade slid by on entry or exit. Habit of holding steel across the body. Right hand, left. He tested the stance, then paced it out. Bed to window, window to door, tracing the groove of a body moving in the dark. On the chair back, a heavy coat, worn smooth at the collar with salt. Pocket yielded a cheap handkerchief, the edge stained faint brown. No papers. One woman's shoe jutted under the bed, the other was gone. The girl owned almost nothing. The room now spoke in the killer's voice. A thin notebook arrived with the neighbor's statements, singing an Irish ballad, soft and tired, then voices, low, very close, for a long while. The lamp went out, then flared again, as if a palm smothered the flame, then let it live. Near dawn, steps leaving, light, quick. I slid the window latch, a hiss small enough to hide beneath a well bucket's squeal or floorboard's groan. He knew how to tuck his sounds inside the streets. By the bed leg, a flattened strip of black cloth, the same color, weave, and thread as the newsroom scrap. The detective set them side by side, married the edges. A piece of the picture clicked in. His pen underlined 3 times. He lingered at the grate. Pressed ash revealed 2 nubs of candle wax, torn off. Grease smoke smudged low, but higher the soot ran dry, paper more than coal. Fingernail grooves on the hearth ledge, pale scratches in black ash, like someone had scooped, squeezed, sprinkled to be sure no letters survived. He feared his words most, so he wrote here. Before he left, or wrote here. A wind slipped the window, the flame bowed. A cinder sailed and kissed the sheet. Across the linen, a faint diagonal scuff, as if rope had rasped over it. No rope in sight, but beneath the bed lay a short, stiff jute fiber, the kind that ties market bundles. He'd brought it, or found it in the alley. I remembered the pump at the street's head, a place to rinse anything clean before the fog swallowed him. On the hearth shelf rested a long, half-burnt cigarette, its end chewed flat. He lifted it to his nose, breathed short. Not the lodger's slop tobacco. Oriental leaf, bright cured, a tart, clean note, sold far from here. Not rich, perhaps, but he spent on what he wanted. He carried his own smoke. The butt slipped into an evidence tin, and the portrait sharpened, self-contained, routine, equipped, a man who trusted habit over luck. We kept time by the lamp's shadow sliding the wall. On the last loop, I watched the detective perform the man's ritual. Arrive, perch on the lame chair, lean to the sill and smoke. Rise, crack the latch for a draft, snuff the flame with a palm. Relight to look at what he had done. Then burn paper, tidy edges, close the door. No speech, no spare marks. Outside, newsboys ghosted the lane. The story would explode by noon. But now only the detective's pen existed. On the map, he drew a line from Dorset Street through the Flower and Dean Circle, arrowed it to the well, then the market cut. An escape route already practiced. He wrote, stayed long, ritual, confident, brought tools, shelter nearby. Then one bold sentence, not a phantom, a man, with calendar, hour, and habit. A constable brought the entry list from the lodging house. Names in fog, 2, off to early shift. 1 gentleman visitor no one could picture, 1 bowler-hatted gentleman, leaving before dawn. The detective pricked 3 dots beside 3 lines. No big strokes, no red ink, like dropping 3 grains into an hourglass about to turn. We stepped into the hall. Cold stung my eyes. Fog pooled in the yard. Figures huddled and murmured like underground water. The detective paused on the stoop, staring at the window he'd just shut. A white bead of candle wax still clung to the frame. A comma in a sentence not yet finished. I thought of the clerk, the thin envelope, rubber overshoes, public pump. Woman followed to her door, black cloth. Strays that now sang in chorus in this room. Iron filings shaking toward a hidden magnet. At the street head, the winch creaked again. The detective turned and moved for the well. On the stones, faint wet streaks trailed. No rain yet this morning. He touched a fingertip, lifted it to his nose, then looked at me. No words. Someone rinsed what shouldn't be taken home. And he walked the path we've just traced. At the well, slime on the rim, moss slick as soap, yet the handle's edge was oddly clean, as if wiped with cloth. In the hinge, a short jute fiber, twinned to the thread from under the bed. He eased it free and sealed it. The ground was mud-pocked with big soles, deep where a man had paused, light where he'd sprinted. Spray marks flared at the edge, a man washing fast, maybe a long, narrow tool. A single rinse, a hard shake, then gone. Back in the alley we turned right, ducked the cut toward Flower and Dean. Fog laid itself along the bricks, swallowing our steps. A cat sprang from a bin and vanished. At the choke point, he measured the span with his reach and noted, 2 cannot pass without touching. No witness heard an argument. He walked alone. On the brick at hand height, a patch worn slick, the place 1,000 palms had grabbed to swing the corner. He didn't think the turn, his body remembered it. By the time we returned to the station, the sky had paled to ash. The strategy room lay open. On the table, jute fiber, brick dust, cigarette butt, black cloth, charred paper. The detective made no speech. He set each piece down in route order. Bed, window, hearth, door, well, alley, Flower, and Dean. The path stood out so clear I could follow it with my eyes shut. His final lines that morning closed like a whispered verdict. He is near. He lives among us. He is unhurried. He loves the ritual. And he will return, unless we break his habits first. I shut my own notebook. Church bells cracked the morning and shattered into fog. Dorset Street was already under canvas. Newsboys were running. Headlines would bleed in color again. But in the sweat and ink air of that cramped room, I knew we held the most important thing yet, a portrait made of habits. Not a name, not a face. The way he breathed, walked, smoked, opened windows, burned paper, washed hands, disappeared. One day, those habits would miss a beat. If luck took our side, we'd be standing in the right place when they did. For now, Whitechapel held its breath. Would the dark dare return, or had it learned to fear a city's eyes peering through the fog? That night, after a day spent wading through Whitechapel's mist, the detective didn't go straight back to the station. He turned down to a small house at the end of the lane, where a thin blade of lamplight cut the door's seam. I followed, not yet knowing why. An old woman opened up, slight frame, white hair loose over her shoulders. She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. No introduction was needed. This was no ordinary witness. She was the mother of a young officer who had died on a previous case, the same officer the detective had treated like a younger brother. Now she lived quietly, finding comfort in a small charity fellowship in Whitechapel. Inside, the room smelled of herbs and damp wood. She poured tea, hands trembling, then spoke, half whisper, half breath. I don't know if this helps, but those girls, Nichols, Chapman, even Stride, they all came to the fellowship I attend. A small place under an old church basement. We hand out soup, warm coats, read a little prayer. The detective leaned forward. A hard light flickered in his eyes. Outside, fog crawled up the window slats. Inside, the lamp rocked, throwing a soft gold over the sheet of paper smoothed on the table. A young constable waited with a pencil, eyes never leaving the old woman's tight shawl. The detective didn't hurry. He turned a page, lowered his pen, and nodded once. Please, whatever you remember. Gestures. Habits. Anything. She closed her eyes. A fingertip trembled on the teacup's rim. Her voice climbed from the well of memory. The artist, he was thin, narrow shoulders, a bit hunched. Always carried a paint-smeared satchel. His coat was worn through at the elbows. When he smiled, it pulled to one side, like wind was tugging his mouth. Graphite scratched a gaunt, sloping figure into life. The detective's glance flashed, quick, sharp. The butcher, shoulders like barrels, every step heavy. His leather apron always stained. The smell of raw meat clung even when he sat. He laughed loudly, but his teeth were yellowed. His hands, there was always a brown cast on them, like it never washed all the way off. The page filled with a hulking frame, a man who seemed to block a doorway by standing in it. The doctor was different. Neat, collar done high, long white fingers. When he handed out medicine, his touch was very light, like he was weighing the pulse in your wrist. His eyes, cold as a needle. The pencil raced, cutting a thin jaw and pointed gaze. And the benefactor, he always came by carriage. Someone held his cloak when he stepped down. A bowler hat, a gentleman's smile, but I never saw the eyes smile with it. When he gave money, he only touched with the fingertips and let go quickly, like dirt might leap up. A straight silhouette formed, long coat, bowler shading half a face. When the four rough sketches lay side by side, the room went quiet. They weren't finished portraits, but each line pricked something in the dark. Faces I could swear I had glimpsed in Whitechapel's fog. The detective studied them. Tap, tap, tap. His pen on the table. Then he closed the book. In the wavering light, it felt like the circle had clicked shut. These were no longer faceless rumors. They had height and weight. They had breath. Opening the 4-case files, lamplight washed the grain of the wooden desk. For thick folders sat stacked like paper coffins. The detective flipped each cover, and with every turn the room seemed to hold its breath for a beat. Case File 1, Dr. Reginald Whitmore, the fallen physician. A slightly blurred portrait, a long face, deep-set eyes, and the fine, practiced hands of a man who knew scalpels. Background: once a West End doctor, stripped of his license over questionable experiments. Why Whitechapel? Claims to dispense charity medicine, but in truth haunts the slums searching for rare conditions to study. Disturbing habit: collects pathological specimens and anatomical fixation. Witnesses say he studies poor women's bodies as if measuring them. The detective underlined surgical blades, medical knowledge, fixation on the body. Case File 2. Thomas Hargreaves, the butcher. A dark red ink blot bled across the folder like fresh blood. Background: slaughterman on the South Market line. Nose cuts, nose blades, nose blood. Why Whitechapel regularly donates leftover meat to the Fellowship's soup kitchen, a ready-made halo. Disturbing habit: when drunk, performs speed cuts in the pub or kills animals just to show off. Neighbors whisper he loves the instant the blood jets more than he loves his pay. The detective noted: knives, raw strength, showy dissection. Case File 3. Edgar Cole, the broke artist. A loose sketch slid out, a woman's face broken and warped. Background: failed painter. Pub to pub, scraping for commissions. Why Whitechapel? Hired by the Fellowship to paint a few pieces for the reading room. Also prowls the district for cheap models. Disturbing habit: obsessed with deformed anatomy, secretly sketched carcasses at market. His lines chase distortion, not beauty. The pencil dug hard. Studies bodies, distortion obsession, proximity to victims. Case File 4. Lord Henry Ashcroft, the gentleman. The folder was heavy, the paper old and sour. Background: born to rank, former colonial officer. Returned to London with a private wound and an inheritance. Why Whitechapel? Appears as an anonymous benefactor to the Fellowship. A bowler gentleman with mirror glass shoes in a slum no one expects him to haunt. Disturbing habit: collects fine, narrow blades from the continent. Fascinated by psychological experiments on people. Keeps a series of distorted female portraits in his townhouse. A courteous smile draped over a crooked appetite. The detective wrote slowly, like a warning. Military, collected blades, blood fascination, charitable mask. The 4 folders closed. 4 red marks bled on the map of Whitechapel like 4 knife wounds. The detective raised his eyes. The lamp caught a hard shine in them. A fallen doctor. A blood-soaked butcher. A warped-eyed painter. A gentleman with a blade. His pen tapped the desk, dry, judicial, like a gavel. Among them, at least one is Jack. Composite interrogation. A narrow room. Lamplight pooled in the haze. Smoke hung like cobwebs. For chairs faced one another. For silhouettes stretched long on plaster. I sat still and wrote down everything the silence said. Whitmore sat straight-backed, fingers drumming the table. Even, precise, like a surgical heart monitor. No words needed. The tempo itself said he knew how to wait, and how to hide what the hands wanted to do. Hargreaves sprawled, breath ripe with drink. Big hands spread flat on wood. Gray crescents lived under his nails, slaughterhouse grit, or ash from somewhere else. A butcher's hands, yes, or hands that had learned another kind of flesh. Cole folded into himself, clutching a frayed sketchbook. He wouldn't meet a gaze. He watched the stone floor instead. But his thumb worked the edge of the book, as if tracing an invisible line. A question rose in me. Was he imagining a drawing, or remembering a body under candlelight? Ashcroft was the opposite. He eased back with a thin smile, eyes moving over each man like a chess player walking his board. A gloved fingertip smoothed leather idly, and somehow the air grew heavier. Many in uniform hated him. What business does a lord have in Whitechapel? Unless the slum hides a hunger his station won't allow in daylight. The detective stood silent. His steel nib scraped the page. No questions, no dialogue, only the metal's bite. With every stroke, I heard a blade scoring cold stone. For people, for silences. A silence timed like a surgeon's pulse. A silence that smelled of drink and blood. A silence that drifted in obsession. A silence tucked behind a gentleman's smile. In that moment, I understood. Whitechapel wasn't haunted by a shadow. It brimmed with people capable of wearing one. And it takes only one hand, tilting one knife at the right instant, for history to select a name and call it Jack. When the files unfold, the detective turned the lamp up. On the table, he laid a stack of rough sketches. 4 witness drawings of the dead women's faces and frames. Shaky lines, thin ink, enough to call back the buried. No one spoke. The temperature dropped. Whitmore tilted his head, his eyes parked on Annie Chapman's outline. A doctor is used to the human body ill and open. He should not flinch. But his lip ticked, barely. I didn't hear words, but I could picture the thought. An evening at the medicine table. Poor women in line for cheap powders. Annie among them once. Hargreaves blew a hard breath. Bellows in a forge. His eyes blinked fast at Elizabeth Stride's scrawl. I remembered the old woman's story. A butcher who brought trimmings for soup. He never hid that he knew them, but the look he gave the sketch wore something else. Annoyance, or the fear of a trace left behind. Cole went rigid. Catherine Edow's outline lay in front of him. Clean, broken angles. A body misshapen the way he'd drawn the poor. His fingers trembled, stroking the spine of his own sketchbook. Was that tremor for a woman he'd drawn alive, or for the last portrait, executed with steel instead of charcoal? Ashcroft was different. When Mary Jane Kelly's face slid into the light, a thin smile touched his mouth, so slight it almost wasn't there. A gentleman among the poor dead. Why? The rumor. A great benefactor, large donations, irregular in candlelit prayers. A tidy motive, charity. But I saw no pity in those eyes. Only a cold pleasure, as if he remembered nights in the front row, surveying the room and choosing the gaze that interested him most. I turned pages inside my own head. Dr. Whitmore dispensing cheap powders, called a savior. Butcher Hargreaves delivering scraps, feeding the pot. Painter Cole hanging spirit of the poor canvases in the reading room. Lord Ashcroft bankrolling the lot, sometimes presiding at prayers. Each had reason to be welcomed where the victims gathered. Not coincidence. Habit. A quiet web. For men, 4 roles inside a single small fellowship where poor women sought relief. And now the 4 roles sat here, facing the faces that had slipped into Whitechapel's fog. A church basement was meant to be shelter. For someone among them, it had become a stage. Tonight we were seated with the cast. The ultimatum. The next morning's papers went up like straw on a spark. Front page in blood-red type. Police powerless. They even summon a lord. Under it, 4 dragged in. Disgraced doctor, drunken butcher, penniless artist, polished gentleman. Sheets slapped the conference table like blades. Pins hammered wood. Fists tightened. Lamplight turned everyone's breath into a gray fog of tobacco. At the head of the table, the Whitechapel superintendent sat bolt upright, eyes like augers. His voice was gravel, but iron. 3 days. Only 3. Before city officials and the press descend. Fail, and we are puppets on strings. Silence. I heard the detective's nib score a long line in his book. No protest. He folded the notebook, stood, and left. His coat hissed over the boards, like a knife unzipping canvas. I followed. His stride never rushed, but it never wavered. In that instant I understood. The circle had closed. No more foggy hypotheses. No waiting on luck. Each man would sit alone with the truth. A cold tally rang in my head. Whitmore, a surgeon's hands. Hargreaves, a life in blood. Cole, a gaze that broke bodies into shapes. Ashcroft, a smile with a blade hiding in it. 3 days. For suspects. 5 bodies. And now, the one-on-one interrogations began. The doctor's interrogation, Whitmore. The lamplight sharpened every edge in the room. The doctor entered first, tall, gaunt, gray cloak brushing the floor. His eyes were ringed with sleepless bruises, yet his lips curved into a thin smile, the kind a surgeon wears before anesthesia. The detective did not greet him. He spread papers across the desk, burnt scraps from Dorset Street, the faint watermark of a paper brand. He placed it beside a receipt from a stationer's shop, Whitmore's name written in ink. Whitmore's long fingers tapped once, twice, 3 times. Paper, he murmured. Common enough. Your efforts to tie it to me are imaginative. No answer. Only the creak of a chair as the detective turned another page. Hospital rosters. His name absent. The nurse's note. Clinic closed at 10 that night. Empty hours staring back. The doctor's smile faltered, then returned. Clerical errors. Mistaken memory. You cannot prove absence. The detective tapped his pencil thrice against the desk. A private code. Silence as trap. The doctor's hand stilled. One tremor betrayed him before he forced it down. The butcher's interrogation. Hargreaves. The butcher's boots struck stone, heavy as mallets. He smelled of iron and beer. When he dropped into the chair, it groaned like bone. The detective unwrapped a cloth. Inside, red dust, coarse fibers. He placed them beside a report from the slaughterhouse, cord for hanging carcasses, brick grit from the pens. And beside those, a sketch of hobnailed boots, the same tread stamped into Dorset Street mud. Hargreaves' broad face drained pale. His voice came up rough. Those things are everywhere. Every man in Whitechapel owns rope. Every yard has red brick. Another page turned. The publican's statement. Hargreaves left the tavern before midnight. His alibi stopped short. His big hands clenched the table until the wood groaned. Sweat drew lines down his temples, yet he said nothing more. The silence pressed on him like a block of stone. The artist's interrogation, Cole. Cole entered with the smell of turpentine, his threadbare coat hanging loose, a sketchbook bulging under his arm. Hollow eyes scanned the walls before daring to meet the lamplight. The detective slid drawings across the desk, found in Cole's room. Women twisted, broken, sliced by strokes of charcoal. He laid a crime scene photograph beside them. The lines matched like echoes. Cole gave a crooked laugh, thin as paper tearing. Art reflects horror. Would you jail Goya for painting more? You would call me a monster for daring to see. The detective did not reply. Instead, he placed a woman's testimony. She'd seen Cole sketching outside Hanbury Street, hours after Chapman's death. Cole's hand jerked on his book strap. He whispered, almost to himself, "Coincidence. Nothing more. Just coincidence." But the laugh that followed caught in his throat, and the room swallowed the sound. The gentleman's interrogation, Ashcroft. Ashcroft swept in with cologne and polish, his cane tapping rhythm on stone. He smiled as though arriving at a salon, not a cell. The detective set a small envelope on the desk. Inside, a long, bitten cigarette butt found in Mary Jane Kelly's room. The rare tobacco matched the silver case in Ashcroft's pocket. Ashcroft's eyes flickered, then smoothed. His voice purred. "Half the gentlemen at the club smoke this brand. Surely you don't mean to accuse me by association." Another document slid out. A guard statement. Mitre Square, September 30th. A bowler-hatted man of bearing passed near the hour Catherine Eddowes died. Ashcroft's smile lingered, but his eyes, sharp and wary, gave him away. He leaned back, cane tapping once more, as if to claim the rhythm of the room. The detective closed the folder. Silence answered, and the silence carried more weight than any denial. 4 shadows in one room. Later that night, the 4 sat together. For chairs, for shadows crossing one another. The lamp hissed. The air thickened. Whitmore's finger drumming returned, steady as a surgeon timing his cuts. Hargreaves huffed through his nose, sweat beading, jaw iron clamped. Cole clutched his sketchbook, thumb rubbing phantom lines. Ashcroft lounged with his mask-like smile, yet his eyes darted sharp as razors. The detective placed 4 artifacts on the desk: burnt paper, slaughter rope, twisted sketches, foreign tobacco. He did not speak. One by one, the objects clicked down, heavy as stones in a grave. The 4 suspects glanced sideways. Suspicion, disdain, calculation. A web tightening. No confession, only silence thick enough to choke. The detective's pen carved a final circle around a name. No one but he and I saw. The ink hissed like steel on stone. The ultimatum. Morning broke with headlines screaming. Police fail again. Even a lord is dragged in. 4 faces, no answer. Doctor, butcher, artist, gentleman. The papers slapped the council table like knives. Cigarette smoke coiled under the low ceiling. Anger buzzed in every fist and gavel. At the head, the superintendent leaned forward, eyes drilling the detective. His voice rasped. 3 days. No more. Before the officials descend. Bring me a name, or we are finished. The room froze. The detective wrote one long line in his notebook. No protest. He shut it, rose, and walked out. His coat whispered like a blade unsheathed. I followed. His steps slow, steady. And I knew. The time for fog was over. The hunt had narrowed to faces, chairs, and knives. For men, 5 women dead. 3 days left. The final interrogations had begun. Interrogation scene, Dr. Reginald Whitmore. The interrogation chamber of Scotland Yard was thick with tobacco smoke and the damp breath of stone walls. A single oil lamp swung overhead, casting a dry, yellow light that quivered with every draft seeping through the narrow door crack. On the heavy oak table lay 4 open case files, their curled corners like tongues waiting to swallow prey. Dr. Reginald Whitmore entered, tall, gaunt, gray cloak falling straight. At 44, he carried the poise of a former lecturer, yet his hollow eyes, slow even breath, and long fingers drumming on the table betrayed a man trained not to flinch. He sat down, lacing his hands, gaze sweeping the room as if he were the interrogator. I stayed in the corner, silent witness. Before me was a chess match of psychology, where every piece was a clue, every move measured. Nichols, Bucks Row, August 31st. The detective opened the first file. A photograph of Mary and Nichols flickered under the lamp, her frozen face, eyes staring into nothing. In Whitmore's written statement, that night, at the clinic, attending a malaria patient. Neat, plausible. But the next page fell like a blade, the duty roster. A blank column. No doctor's name, no signature, no nurse's notes. Empty paper, yet an indictment. Whitmore's fingers still tapped, but slower now. He raised his head, calm, almost daring. Papers get misplaced, witnesses forget. Then the detective laid out the autopsy photo. Nichols' throat cut clean, the incision narrow, decisive, surgical. A cut from a hand long married to a scalpel. I looked at his fingers on the table. They froze, curled inward, nails pressing pale grooves into the wood. Arrogance bent, a crease of doubt folding across his brow. Chapman, Hanbury Street, September 8th. The second file, Annie Chapman, found disemboweled in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, in the dim light of dawn. Whitmore claimed he had visited an old patient suffering chest pains. The detective slid across a pharmacy receipt. Morphine and phenol, signed Reginald Whitmore. Time of purchase, 5 a.m. The very hour Chapman lay cooling in the yard. Sweat beaded on Whitmore's forehead. He licked his dry lips, shifted his posture. Then came another item, a fragment of burnt paper, pulled from refuse near the scene. Hospital stock paper, rare, bought only from Parker's. Under magnification, faint watermarked fibers. Whitmore leaned back, one hand to his mouth, eyes darting. A moment ago he sat like a judge. Now he sagged into the chair, a defendant grasping for ground. The double event, Stride and Eddowes, September 30th. Two photographs placed side by side, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. Two deaths, one night. Stride cut short, Eddowes mutilated beyond recognition. Whitmore inhaled sharply, struggling for calm. The next page shattered it. Testimony from a boarding house nurse. She saw a tall, thin man in a gray coat leaving Whitmore's clinic as the alarm whistles blared that night. On the table appeared another scrap, black cloth, soiled, found in Flower and Dean. Chemical residue still clung to the fibers. In Whitmore's own journal, medical notations sketched viscera in shorthand, diagrams eerily matching Eddowes' missing organs. Whitmore's eyes flared, as if to burn it all away, but his hand at his lips trembled. Sweat traced pale streaks down his hollow cheeks. Kelly, Dorset Street, November 9th. At last, Mary Jane Kelly. The room in Dorset Street, a storm of knives. The detective produced a small pouch, a charred paper fragment, still etched with half-burned medical symbols. Whitmore's shorthand. Then, a foreign cigarette butt, Turkish blend, rare, gathered from Kelly's sill. The same brand Whitmore secretly bought in scholarly shops. And last, a hobnailed rubber-soled boot print, edge chipped, matching the boots found in his abandoned clinic. Whitmore blanched. His lips quivered, his eyes slid away. That once upright frame shrank, his long hands now bone-white against the chair. The proud surgeon reduced to a shadow hunched beneath yellow flame. Crescendo. The room drowned in silence. I heard only the clock's hammering ticks, each one like a judge's gavel. The detective closed the file, stacked them neatly, tapped his pen 3 times. Sharp, final. Whitmore said nothing, but his face confessed, eyes downcast, sweat dripping, fingers trembling. He once believed he could carve truth apart as easily as flesh. Tonight, layer by layer, his masks were stripped until only a beating heart quivered in the light. No words were needed. His silence was testimony. A man of knives, obsessed with anatomy, now dissected by evidence. Conclusion. The detective rose, his shadow spilling across the doctor's thin frame. He gathered the files, signaled the constable. Whitmore stood, staggering, his gray figure a husk under the lamplight. From dignified scholar to spectral ruin, he left as though already condemned. I lingered in the smoke and dust, breathing the sour mix of sweat and burnt paper. In my mind, one truth echoed. Jack the Ripper was no phantom. He was flesh and bone. And tonight, one of his faces had been forced bare, not by confession, but by the collapse of silence. Interrogation scene. Thomas Hargreaves, the Whitechapel butcher. The shift had changed, yet the air was still thick with smoke. This time, however, there was no smug silence of an intellectual, only the brute weight of a man who filled the room like a storm. Thomas Hargreaves was near 40, towering over 6 feet, close to 200 pounds. His shoulders seemed carved from the doorframe itself. A heavy shirt stretched taut across his frame, sleeves rolled past the elbows to reveal forearms etched with bold scars, angry red lines that no wash could erase. He carried the stench of sweat, gin, and that unmistakable tang I'd smelled in the Whitechapel slaughterhouse, fresh blood. The chair groaned beneath him as he sat, his bulk pressing the wood near breaking. He slammed his broad palms flat on the table, leaving damp prints that smelled faintly of iron. There was no aristocratic arrogance in him, only the brash defiance of a man used to cowing others with sheer size and voice. Yet here, in the cold stone chamber, he looked less like a predator and more like a beast penned for judgment. I remained in the corner, unseen, watching the atmosphere shift. Across the table, the detective sat motionless, eyes like steel. Words were unnecessary, the evidence would speak. Nichols, Bucks Row, August 31st. Marian Nichols. The first file. Her throat, cut with clinical neatness. Hargreaves shrugged, eyes defiant. Slitting a throat meant nothing to a butcher. But the detective laid down a coarse hemp cord, found among offal discarded near the scene. It was the exact twine used in Whitechapel slaughterhouses to bind pig intestines. The butcher's gaze faltered for the briefest second. He picked up the cord, twisting it in his thick fingers with feigned indifference. But in the detective's ledger was already a note. Cord from slaughterhouse stock, issued only to master butchers. Next came the rubber-soled boots, their tread-matching prints in Bucks Row. Heavy soles, built to keep balance on blood-slicked floors. Soil embedded in the tread matched the clay of East Whitechapel, the very ground where Nichols had bled out. Hargreaves shifted, chair creaking. His chest heaved, then sank, and his eyes sought the ceiling. His fingers drummed, no longer steady, now erratic. Chapman, Hanbury Street, September 8th. Annie Chapman, found torn apart in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. The detective placed down a photo of organs wrapped in twine, identical hemp cord. Then another exhibit, a heavy apron, half burned in a refuse fire near Hargreaves' lodgings. The scorched cloth still reeked of char, the stains beneath it hidden but not erased. Hargreaves licked his lips. Sweat bled into his hairline. He claimed he had been delivering meat to a church kitchen that morning. But the kitchen ledger contradicted him. No deliveries logged that day. His thick hands clenched together, knuckles popping like splitting bone. That brute force, once his shield, now betrayed unease. Each new item laid before him seemed to press his shoulders further down, like a bull slowly winded in the ring. The double event, Stride and Eddowes, September 30th. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. One night, 2 deaths. No hard evidence linked him to Stride, only whispers of a broad man in an apron, smoking near Burner Street. But for Eddowes, the threads tightened. Another piece of hemp cord, blood-specked, retrieved from refuse near Mitre Square. It matched the coils from Hargreaves' slaughterhouse. A statement followed. A witness recalled a large man in a short coat, boots clumsy with weight, slipping into an alley by Mitre Square just before the alarm bells. The gait was uneven, awkward, the drag of boots too heavy for quick escape. Hargreaves flushed crimson, not with drink, but something hotter. His bulk shifted, the chair groaning in protest. His eyes, sharp and hostile, slid away the moment they fell on the cord, the prints, the notes. Kelly, Dorset Street, November 9th. Mary Jane Kelly, Dorset Street. The storm of knives. The detective produced a flake of brick dust scraped from Hargreaves' boots, matching the crumbling wall outside Kelly's room. Then a thick rag, brown-stained, fished from a gutter near his home. A butcher's rag, used to wipe blades. Hargreaves bowed his head, shoulders trembling. Not from grief, but from a rage he could no longer wield. His palms slammed the table once, rattling a tin cup. Then he drew back, aware that those massive hands had already been described by witnesses. The butcher's mind. I watched him unravel. He had entered like a bull, carrying brute certainty that blood was his language, his trade. But each cord, each rag, each print, was a blade slipped between his armor. Arrogance dulled. Defiance sagged. The same hands that once butchered without thought now fidgeted, twitched, clasped, and trembled. He looked less like a master of slaughter, and more like an animal cornered by its own stench. Blood had always been his world, on aprons, knives, floors. But here, laid against Nichols, Chapman, Stride, Eddowes, Kelly, blood was no longer routine. It was accusation. Conclusion. When the detective closed the file, silence weighed the room. Hargreaves sat slumped, eyes bloodshot, staring at the damp prints of his own hands on the wood. His entire bulk seemed to collapse into itself, a carcass without life. The detective rose, signaled the guard, and left. I followed, glancing back. The butcher, once bullish and unbreakable, now sagged into his chair, reeking of sweat, smoke, and failure. And I understood. Jack did not only wear the cold mask of a doctor. He could just as easily wear the hulking frame of a butcher, hands too familiar with knives. Interrogation scene. Edgar Cole, the Whitechapel artist. They brought him in while the fog outside still pressed heavy against the windows. Edgar Cole, 29, bent and narrow like a figure sketched wrong. His coat was threadbare at the shoulders, collar stained with linseed and paint. His face was hollow, jaw sharp, eyes sunk in dark rings that spoke of sleepless nights. Fingers mottled with dried ochre and sienna twitched faintly, the reflex of a man who had held a pencil too long. From the moment he entered, his eyes roved, not to people, but through them, sketching their shapes silently. I shuddered. That wasn't fear in his gaze. It was the gaze of an observer, turning everything into line and shadow. He sat, bony hands folded, lips twisting into a half-smile, as though the interrogation room itself was a drawing left unfinished. The detective did not rush. He opened the first file and slid a photograph of Mary and Nichols across the table. Cole's eyes caught the image. For a heartbeat, they lit with recognition, like an artist spotting a subject. Then he coughed, bowed his head, and traced invisible strokes on the table with his fingers, fine, deliberate, unsettling. Nichols, Bucks Row, August 31st. From his pocket, the detective produced a small, yellowed sketchbook. Rough pencil marks showed Bucks Row, captured days before Nichols' death. The work was unmistakably Cole's. The detective's pen scratched across the margin. Cole present before the crime. Cole leaned back, wearing the crooked smile of a drifter. I sketched streets, alleys, whatever pays for supper, he murmured. But then came the breadcrumb, literally. A fragment of stale bread found clinging to Nichols' wound. The very kind served at the tavern where Cole drew portraits for pennies. He was notorious for eating quickly, scattering crumbs across his sleeves, smearing them into paint. Cole's eye twitched. His hand raked back greasy hair. The smile collapsed. Silence spread. Chapman, Hanbury Street, September 8th. Annie Chapman, butchered in a backyard. On the wooden fence, a jagged pencil mark long overlooked. Under magnification, the break in pressure matched the strokes in Cole's sketchbook. Cole stared hard at the photo, eyes hollowing deeper. His fingers hovered, sketching in air. No denial, just the trance of a man revisiting obsession. Next, the detective laid down a slender knife, used for trimming frames. Its nicked edge matched a gouge found on Chapman's doorframe. Cole's knife. Cole bit his lip until it bled, wiped it fast, but the stain shone red against paint-stained skin. The double event, Stride and Eddowes, September 30th. Stride first, thin evidence. A newsboy recalled Cole sketching her days before. A harmless drawing, he claimed. But when her portrait surfaced in his sketchbook, the protest died on his lips. His eyelids closed tight. Then Catherine Eddowes. In her pocket, a torn scrap with a pencil sketch of a slanted rooftop. It matched a half-finished drawing in Cole's book, line for line. The pressure marks in graphite were identical to his hand. Cole trembled, coughing into his fist. He dabbed sweat with a rag, streaked with linseed oil, the same residue found on Eddowes' clothes. Coincidence, or contamination from touch? His breath rattled, shallow as an opium smoker's. Kelly, Dorset Street, November 9th. Finally, Mary Jane Kelly. The detective laid down Cole's tavern sketch of her face, drawn 1 week before her death. Hours spent watching her, pencil chewing paper. On Dorset Street's floor, police had lifted a faint heel print with a patched rubber sole. Cole's boots bore the same patch, same missing edge. The detective placed them side by side. Cole stiffened. His frail frame shook. The smile was gone, replaced with hollow despair. The artist's mind. At first, Cole seemed adrift, a dreamer, detached, sketching the air. But one by one, the artifacts piled. Sketches, the chipped knife, the rooftop scrap, the oil stain, the broken heel. Each proof was a new line, filling in the outline of a man he couldn't deny. By the end, his fingers no longer drew. They clutched the table, knuckles trembling. His eyes fell to the floor. Every fresh piece of evidence brought only silence, silence that groaned heavier than denial. Edgar Cole had lived by observing, by reducing the world to line and form. But now he was the drawing, unfinished, grotesque, exposed under lamplight. Conclusion. When the detective closed the file, Cole sagged into his chair, spine curved like a ruined sketch. No smile, no artist's gaze, only a gaunt mask blurred in the lamp's flicker. I followed the detective out. Looking back, I saw Cole still tracing in the air with his fingers, empty outlines, twisted forms without meaning. He needed no knife, no cord. His own mind was the slaughterhouse, his obsessions carving flesh as if it were canvas. And I knew then, Jack could hide not only in the mask of doctor or butcher, but also in the hollow eyes of a starving artist who mistook murder for art. Interrogation scene. Lord Henry Ashcroft, the top-hatted gentleman. They brought him in unlike the others. No gaunt tremor of a doctor, no butcher's reek of blood, no artist's hands stained with paint. Lord Henry Ashcroft entered as though to a private salon, the guest of honor. His coat was finely cut, silver-threaded lapels catching the lamplight. The hard black bowler he removed with deliberate poise, placing it on the table as though the room itself should bow. Behind me, I heard an officer's breath, heavy with resentment, hatred for the man born above the rest. But Ashcroft barely noticed. He smiled thinly, stroking the seam of his glove, pale blue eyes settling longest on the detective, carrying both contempt and curiosity. The detective gave nothing back. He simply spread 5 photographs across the table, 5 victims, 5 streets. In the flickering lamp, Ashcroft's smile warped into something grotesque. Nichols, Bucks Row, August 31st. We begin here, the detective murmured, voice low, weighty. Nichols' face stared from the photograph. Ashcroft leaned back, smirking. That night, the detective continued. A watchman swore he saw a gentleman, fine coat, bowler low across his brow, walking past Bucks Row. His gait was steady, military, not the shuffle of a drunk laborer. Ashcroft snorted, drummed the table. Whitechapel is full of hats. The man was drunk on coal smoke. Without reply, the detective laid down a glove. Black calfskin, a faint scratch at the seam, found near the body. He set it beside Ashcroft's own. The pair matched perfectly. Ashcroft tilted his head. The smile remained, but his fingers locked tighter together. Chapman, Hanbury Street, September 8th. Annie Chapman. Her photo laid flat. The detective produced a newspaper, The Times, September, scandalizing gentleman who frequented the slums for illicit pleasure. A witness claimed she saw Ashcroft slip from a filthy lodging house at dawn, coat drawn tight. She remembered the smile and the flash of a gold ring. The detective did not argue. He simply placed Ashcroft's ring beside the testimony. On Hanbury's back door frame, police had found a small circular dent, a ring-shaped mark in the wood. Ashcroft chuckled, but his lip twitched. They invent stories when they see a lord in Whitechapel. It profits them. The detective marked his notebook with one long stroke. The sound of pen to paper was sharper than a blade.
The double event, Stride and Edhouse, September 30th. 2 photographs side by side. Stride. Edhouse. The detective dropped a cigar but, half-smoked, crushed. Havana import. Not sold in Whitechapel, only in gentlemen's clubs. Ashcroft's vice was infamous. His eyes flickered. He lifted his brow, smile returning. A cigar does not make a murderer. But next came the footprint. Long, stiff, military tread, pressed into the damp mud of Mitre Square. Not a laborer's boot, but an officer's. Ashcroft had served with the cavalry. He straightened suddenly, chin rising, the posture of a soldier. And that reflex betrayed him more than words. Kelly, Dorset Street, November 9th. The final photo. Mary Jane Kelly. Her room, butchered storm. The detective placed another Havana stub, lifted from her floor. Then, a scrap of scorched cloth, once fine wool, not the rags of a tradesman. Ashcroft swallowed hard. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. She told her neighbors. The detective said evenly. A kind gentleman gave her money, invited drink. She called him the gentleman in the shadows. Hat brim low, polite smile, but eyes that froze her blood. Ashcroft's temper cracked. He slammed the table, voice raw. The word of a drunken whore is your evidence. Silence drowned the room. The outburst echoed against stone walls. For the first time, his mask split. The gentleman unveiled. From the start, Ashcroft sat as the perfect nobleman, smiling, mocking, armored in wealth and pedigree. But the detective never attacked head-on. He layered fragments. The glove, the ring, the cigar, the boots, the charred cloth. Alone, they were trifles. Together, they composed a portrait he could not erase. The noble smile warped into a grimace. His posture stiffened to parade rest. His hand rapped nervously. Each gesture betrayed the fear beneath the mask. He wanted to be unassailable. Instead, he was revealed. Conclusion. When the detective closed the file, Ashcroft inhaled, forcing back dignity. He lifted his bowler, set it neatly upon his head, hiding the sweat still glistening. He tried to rise with hauteur, but his shoulder trembled, just once, before the door closed behind him. The detective needed no words. The pattern was etched clear. Havana smoke, cavalry stride, fine coat, hard hat. Ashcroft's habits had followed him to every killing ground. As I followed the detective out, the room still reeked of Havana tobacco, once a luxury, now stinking of guilt. Composite scene, the detective's war room. The Whitechapel station at night was so quiet I could hear the scratch of the steel nib, the hoarse tick of the wall clock, the faint hiss of wind threading the warped window frame. On the desk, four open case files sprawled over one another like wounds that refused to close. The detective sat motionless. Lamplight pooled over the corded veins of his hands, opening and closing as if he meant to crush the air itself. From behind him, I scanned each page, and the whole room became a chessboard in my mind, its pieces newly turned face up. 1. Whitmore, the surgeon's hand. He underlined line after line in Whitmore's file. Cuts too precise, too decisive. Dorset Street ash. Paper stock matches a rare brand he buys. Night log blank, no one to vouch for his alibi. In the margin he wrote, scalpel, nightly habit of wiping blades, medical diary in symbols. The handwriting crowded the page, ink smudged like the organ sketches in a doctor's notebook. A man too intimate with death for dread to be anything but routine. 2. Hargreaves, the butcher. The second file stank of old blood. Chapman's wounds show coarse force, meat knife signatures. Heavy hobnail tread found at Mitre Square. Drink at night, vanish by dawn. He circled, South Abattoir, fast, sharp, but crude. Then added, knows the smell of blood. Steady hands and gore. I swallowed. To Hargreaves, a body might be nothing but a hog on a block. And yet, too obvious. Would a slaughterman produce cuts that cold, that ceremonial? 3. Edgar Cole, the pauper painter. This file carried flecks of dried pigment from his garret. Grotesque studies, women's bodies torn, lines echoing real wounds. Neighbors overheard him muttering about beauty and decay. Absent from his studio the very nights the killing struck. The detective wrote, aesthetic pathology. Kills to create, to restage. A poor man, possessed by warped beauty, transmuting hunger into sketches, then sketches into blood. But does he have the nerve, the technique? Or does he merely draw what he's heard or witnessed? 4. Lord Henry Ashcroft, the Bollard noble. A thick file yellowed by stacked clippings. Gold ring matches around compression in Hanbury's doorframe. Havana cigar stubs at Mitre Square and Dorset Street. Long military stride, boot prints aligned. He wrote, Aristocrat, former service. Desire masked by charity. On the word desire his pencil tore the paper. First time I'd seen anger in his script. Perhaps in his mind. Ashcroft was the silhouette in the fog. The red circle. He unfurled the map. 5 red dots. Bucks Row, Hanbury Street, Burner Street, Mitre Square, Dorset Street. He drew the lines. A closed ring, the center, Flower and Dean. All 4 had passed through it. The Mission, the Soup Line, the lodging houses. His sigh carried like a draft through a narrow lane. Cold, long, and tired. He wrote a single line, not coincidence. They know the same dark. They share the same night. Branch logic. I watched him think as though raising a tree. Whitmore branch, scalpel skill. If the killer meant to dissect, he could. Yet Whitmore is maladroit in life. Hides encoded notes, as if sealed inside his own head. An observer turned actor, or just a man devoured by his obsession. Hargreaves branch, force, cleaver, drink. He can subdue, but he is crude. Stride and Kelly show something else. A right, not a frenzy. Could he counterfeit finesse? Cole branch, an artist's mind, drawings align with wounds. Strong motive, creation through blood. But he is frail, his hands shake with a real blade. Did he only sketch the tale, or the scene he'd seen? Ashcroft branch, money, access, habit. The ring, the Havanas, the stride. But why crawl through filth? Unless filth is the thrill. Unless power is proven in places where power should not go. 3 taps of his pencil, gavel strokes. He was weighing truth against the killer's game. The knife edge. He wrote a question in the dead center of the page. Is Jack one man, or the shadow they cast together? The room tilted at that thought. Were we chasing a ghost with several faces? A division of labor, a night apiece, a victim each, leaving police, press, the city spinning? He slashed across through the idea, but did not erase. He drew a circle around it. He meant to keep it, an ugly possibility, that guilt had many hands. White Knight. He never left the desk. He laid the artifacts in a line. Glove, ring, cloth, ash, cigar, boots, and built another board, this one of blood. He tested each hypothesis. If Whitmore is Jack, skill, tools, fixation. Lacks the boldness to haunt Whitechapel like a phantom. If Hargreaves is Jack, strength, boots, cold blood. Lacks the surgical stillness. If Cole is Jack, morbid vision, drawings as blueprint. Lacks the body to enforce it. If Ashcroft is Jack, means, Havana, cavalry gate, ring. Lacks a reason to wallow in the slums. Unless that is the very reason. Every path had a gap. Everyone fit and misfit at once. I heard him murmur, speaking to no one but the map. Jack is not only a murderer. He is a game. He leaves enough to make us doubt everyone, not enough to seize anyone. He wants us spent. He wants Whitechapel to fear itself. Jack is suspicion. Verdict, for now. Dawn bled through the grime. He shut the book and wrote one last line. Of these 4, at least one is Jack. Perhaps more than one. But certainly, Jack is already in this room, within these proofs, in the breath we just heard. I looked at the window. The fog still lay over Whitechapel. 4 faces floated in my mind. Surgeon, butcher, painter, noble. Each had a shard of the nightmare. And I understood. The audience for this game is not just us, but the whole city. In the end, one question would remain for someone else to answer. Who is Jack? The 3-day ultimatum. The yard's conference room felt like a pressure vessel. Tobacco smoke eddied beneath the low ceiling, ready to spill onto the strained faces below. I stood at the back, eyes on the wooden bench where dozens of officers sat mute, all attention pinned to the chair at center. The detective, spine straight, hands closed over his battered notebook. At the head, the city superintendent slammed a newspaper onto the table. The headline burned scarlet. Police powerless. Jack mocks London. His voice was shredded, every word a swung hammer. You have 3 days. Before the mayor and the home secretary descend on us, I want a name. Someone swinging from a rope. Whitechapel is falling apart. The press has turned us into a circus. 3 days, or I find your replacement. No one dared breathe. The detective inclined his head, eyes never leaving the open page. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd protest the madness of a deadline. He did not, and his silence weighed more than any oath. Day 1, the press siege. By morning, a pack of reporters lay in wait outside the gates. Magnesium flash burst like summer lightning. Pencils stuck out like knives. The chorus shrieked. Is the killer a doctor? Is Lord Ashcroft under interrogation? Or just a drunken butcher? Could Jack be many men? Do you agree? He answered none of it, only tightened his grip on the notebook until the veins rose. Across the street, children ran and sang it like a rhyme. Jack the Ripper! Jack the Ripper! Innocent laughter, sharp as a blade. By afternoon, we were back tearing through Flower and Dean. Rooms rotted to lint, damp air clogging the lungs. Doors hammered, tenants questioned. Heads shook, mouths smirked. Rumors spilled. Tall, thin man with a leather bag. A gentleman paid for the whole taproom. Vanished. A mad painter muttered about blood. He wrote everything down. His eyes said the rest. Too much noise. Too little truth. Day 2, the sleepless night. We returned to Dorset Street after dark. Fog suffocated the lamps, shivering yellow light onto wet stone. Room 13 sat under a tarpaulin, but the funk of damp and ash lingered. He stood before the doorway a long time, as if looking through canvas into memory. He opened the notebook and laid the fragments again. Thread, ash, cigar, boot marks. He drew the circle closed. Jack is here. I heard him rasp, a voice barely above breath. He lives inside this ring. Each murder is a heartbeat. Miss one, and he'll take the next. At the public pump, the handwheel was still too clean. He rested his fingers, shut his eyes, and listened to the old night. Water sluicing a blade, the quick flick to shake it dry, the departing steps. He wrote, he is never rushed. Ritual. He did not sleep. Back at the station, the lamp burned down, smoke stained the walls. He set the 4 files in a square. In the center he wrote one word, Jack. Day 3, the hourglass. Bells tolled at first light. Whitechapel woke with the hawker's howl. Police at a standstill. Jack to strike again. People squinted into the fog, suspicion in their mouths. They looked at one another as if anyone might be Jack. Inside, the air curdled. 3 days had moved like 3 years. The superintendent smashed the table again. You have 1 afternoon left. Failing that, we arrest all 4 and hang them in the public eye. I studied the detective. Hollowed face, eyes deeper, the ember in them not yet out. He opened the book once more and read the same 4 lines. Doctor, scalpel, ash, empty rota. Butcher, boots, abattoir, blood. Painter, warped studies, obsession, disappearances. Noble, ring, Havanas, parade stride. For faces braided and unbraided. My heart thudded like the hourglass, shaking out its last grain. He shut the book and rose. His voice came low and certain. Don't take them all. Don't show Whitechapel our despair. I will name one man. If I'm wrong, then Jack has already won. The deciding night, we stepped out into a wall of fog. For shadows waited in the interview wing, each with its own smile, its own stare, its own secret. The whole city had its eye on this room, and so did I. The detective sat, set his notebook on the table, and opened to the last page. The steel nib trembled once in his fingers, then drew a firm stroke, one name circled. I held my breath. The room held its breath. Outside, Whitechapel held its breath. Only the rasp of metal on paper remained, the sound of a verdict being written. The deciding night. The wood-paneled room stank of old ink and smoke. Lamplight rocked, washing the table where coffee-spattered reports lay squared like a fanned deck of fate. The wall clock kept a steady beat, but I swore it slowed, as if time itself wanted to prolong the sentence. Outside, Whitechapel hung under a shroud of fog. Whitmore came first. Tall, thin, a gray coat drawn tight. Those long surgeon's fingers drummed a cool, precise rhythm, like a scalpel tapping a tray. He wore the composure of a man long acquainted with the dead. But when the detective slid a curl of fire-scorched paper toward him and a blank duty log to match, that rhythm faltered. His eyes searched, not for truth, but for an exit. A crack, then the mask set again. Hargreaves followed. The chair complained under him. Broad shoulders swallowed half the lamplight. Sweat banded his collar. A sour braid of meat and blood clung to him. When rough hemp and red brick dust hit the table, his face paled. He stared hard, but at nothing. Breath worked from him in short, bellows bursts, the sound of a bull pinned too tight. The detective's silence did the rest, each pause a clean hook to the jaw. Coal slipped in light as a smudge of charcoal, bringing the faint reek of oil paint and damp paper. Frayed coat, heavy satchel, eyes rimmed by weeks without sleep. The warped sketches came out, laid beside the scene photos, and he swallowed. Fingers tightened on the strap, loosened, tightened, as if those same hands had just drawn death into being. A crooked smile tried to form, died when the detective's gaze stopped on a marginal note from a witness. His defense was watercolor thin, already seeping into the coarse stock beneath. Last came Ashcroft. Different in every way. Expensive cologne, perfect cutting, confidence tailored into every seam. The cane kept a lazy cadence on the stone. The half-smile said I outshrank this room. Then the crushed cigar stub touched the wood, and something flickered behind his eyes. A heartbeat only, but enough to show the smile was not armor. It was a mask, and it had begun to crack. Then all four sat together. No one spoke. Lamplight carved their faces, each man hiding in his own way. Whitmore drummed again, off-tempo now. Hargreaves' breath plumed in short, white bursts. Cole bowed over his knees, sketching air with a ghost pencil. Ashcroft reclined, smile polished, eyes lit with a thin, feral vigilance. The detective stood at the center, his coat throwing a long blade of shadow down the room. He asked nothing, accused no one. He only placed, in order, the pieces: scorched paper, hemp fiber, a twisted sketch, a bitten cigar. Each met the wood with the faintest tap, that in the dead quiet landed like a judge's gavel. None of them looked at the exhibits. They watched each other. A flash of suspicion from Whitmore. A curl of contempt from Ashcroft. The set jaw of Hargreaves. The small, lost tremor running through Cole. I felt as if I were staring into a cage of four predators. None yet launched, but blood inevitable. The detective opened his notebook. Steel met paper and screeched dryly. His hand was steady. A thick circle formed on the last page. No one in the room saw which name lay inside. Not even I. But as that nib scraped, each face jerked. No logic to it. Just the animal sense that a knife had found skin. Beyond the door, the superintendent waited, breath heavy. In the street, the press howled for a name. The detective shut the book, slid it inside his coat, and left without a word. For shadows were all that remained, thrown long and shaky across the wall, overlapping, fusing, indistinguishable. And in that moment I understood, Jack was no longer a man. Jack was silence, suspicion, the nightmare seated here among us. The door clicked. The coat vanished. The room lowered into clotted quiet. The one lamp flickered, stretching those four silhouettes into nooses. I kept still and listened. In the quiet, they betrayed themselves. Whitmore held his posture, but the fingers that had drummed now locked down so hard the knuckles went bloodless. His eyes fixed on the patch of tabletop where the evidence had been. A small tug at the corner of his mouth, a calculation forming, then swallowed. The polish remained. The fear bled into it like dye. Hargreaves hunched, great shoulders quivering. He didn't look up. He stared at his boots, as if the dry mud along the edge might confess by itself. Breath sought out of him in heavy spurts. He was a pinned animal, dangerous in the ring, desperate at the rail. Cole collapsed inward. Those slender, stained fingers kept tracing lines on his knee, broken strokes, never making an image. His eyes tunneled through the wall, layering memory over brick, charcoal, then bodies. A bead of sweat dropped onto the corner of a sketch peeking from his bag and bloomed there, the only outward mark of the panic he was trying to paint over. Ashcroft lounged, the half-smile still nailed in place, but his long fingers wouldn't rest, turning a silver ring until the skin reddened. His glance hopped, to each man in turn. The practiced host at a table suddenly set for revenants. In that look I caught not just defense, but calculus. Should one of the others break, he meant to spend it. For men in one room, and yet four sealed worlds. No eye contact held. Only the lamp, stuttering. Only the hairline cracks appearing in their masks. I stood and listened to my own heart and knew. The detective had left, but the real game had finally begun. Silence grave cold. The lamp guttered. The shadows on the wall buckled into warped figures. There was no sound except the hammer weight of my own pulse. Whitmore's composure twitched. Hargreaves breathed through his nose, powerful, cornered. Cole drew with nothing in his hand, carving invisible knives into cloth. Ashcroft's smile stayed, but the ring spun until it kissed blood. All different, but under that exhausted light, guilt and innocence shared a face. For masks, and every one of them fissured. And in the thick quiet, a whisper floated up, from the dark, or from inside my skull. If one of these four is Jack, then right now, he's smiling. For the audience, your turn. If you were the detective, which name would you circle? Take the fragments, scorched paper, hemp fiber, the twisted sketch, the cigar stub, and see which of the four, Whitmore, Hargreaves, Cole, Ashcroft, could truly be Jack the Ripper. Who do you believe the killer is? Lay out your reasoning, and be ready for a headache. The truth in Whitechapel rarely travels alone. The whisper still echoed when the room dissolved. The lamp's flame blinked out, and I jolted awake to the brittle creak of a library chair. The smell of ink and dust flooded back. Around me, nothing but shelves, files, and the endless hush of forgotten paper. For a moment, my pulse refused to slow. The four faces lingered in my mind. Whitmore's surgeon's hands, Hargreaves' butcher's breath, Cole's trembling sketches, Ashcroft's silver-tongued smirk. They were no longer men of flesh and bone. They were archetypes, masks carved into the city itself. I looked down. The folder on the desk was still open, its last page blank, except for a single, heavy circle scrawled in black ink. No name, just the circle, as if the detective himself had left me the burden. Was Jack one man with four disguises? For men who shared one appetite? Or something more elusive, an idea, a contagion of cruelty that Whitechapel carried in its fog? The city had birthed many monsters. Perhaps Jack was merely the mask they wore in turn. I ran my hand across the page, half expecting the ink to smear. It did not. The circle stared back at me, unbroken, daring me to fill it. And in the silence of that library, with only the clock ticking and the wind outside scratching against the window panes, I swore I heard it again, that same breath of a whisper. If any of them was Jack, then right now, he is smiling. So tell me, reader, if the pen were in your hand, whose name would you write inside that circle? The final whisper. The whisper. The Scotland Yard conference room lay as silent as a tomb. Gas lamps flickered, casting sickly halos over the faces of weary officers who had not slept for nights. At the head of the table, the chief of Whitechapel tapped his fingers, waiting. Outside, the press howled for blood. The people of London wanted a name. The detective sat still, his thick notebook closed, but his hands clenched tight on the cover. No one dared breathe too loudly. At last, he rose. His footsteps thudded across the wooden floor, sharp and final. He stopped at the chief's chair, leaned down, and whispered into his ear. I was close enough to hear the breath, but not the words. Only the faint movement of lips, shaping a name that would never reach me. The chief stiffened, eyes flashing with surprise. His pen snapped in his grip, ink bleeding across the page. Then, slowly, he gave a single nod, like a man accepting a verdict carved into stone. The name had been spoken, but for me, and for history, it was lost. The public stage. The next day, Whitechapel gathered in a frenzy. Thousands crowded beneath the pale glow of gaslight, their breath hanging as mist in the November air. Reporters jostled for place, cameras cocked, headlines already drafted. Jack the Ripper finally unmasked. Justice for Whitechapel. The Phantom has a face. A makeshift platform loomed above the crowd. The chief stepped out, rigid, holding a folded sheet of paper. Behind him, the detective stood in shadow, cloak draped like a curtain, his eyes hidden. The mob roared for a name, for justice, for a neck to stretch. The chief raised the paper. The crowd hushed. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then a gust ripped through the square, tugging the sheet from his grip. His lips moved, shaping a word. But between the howls of the mob, the creak of wooden beams, and the cry of a child at the front, the name blurred into noise. Some swore they heard Whitmore. Others said Hargreaves. Still others, Cole. A few insisted on Ashcroft. By dawn, each newspaper had printed a different name. The crowd had their scapegoat. But truth had slipped, once again, into the fog, the shadow behind the curtain. That night, Whitechapel lay unusually quiet. The fog rolled heavier, swallowing every alley and gutter. I followed the detective to a shabby gin house, where yellow lamplights spilled through warped glass. He sat at a corner table, ordered the cheapest gin, and set his notebook before him. They could all be Jack, he muttered, staring into the glass. And maybe none of them are. Maybe Jack exists only because London needs a name for its fear. I shivered. Outside, Tall men in gray coats, broad-shouldered brutes in aprons, thin artists with hollow eyes, and stiff-backed gentlemen in top hats drifted past in the fog. Any of them could have been Jack. Any of them might still be. The frame, present day. The scene dissolved into gold light and dust. No more gas lamps. No more fog. I sat in a library. High shelves towered, rows of forgotten case files wrapped in brittle leather. Before me lay a thick volume stamped in faded silver. Whitechapel case files, 1888. I turned to the final page. Ink blurred, paper yellowed with age. The detective's handwriting curled in black streaks. At the center, a heavy circle. But the name inside had been drowned in spilled ink, erased forever. I looked up. The library was empty. But in the silence, I felt them still. Whitmore's tapping fingers. Hargreaves's ragged breath. Cole's twitching hand sketching the air. Ashcroft's gloved finger twisting his silver ring. They had followed me here, through a century of dust and silence. Jack the Ripper had never left. The final opening. If you hold these files now, you must decide. Was it Dr. Reginald Whitmore, the surgeon fallen from grace, obsessed with anatomy, his fingers too precise for coincidence? Or Thomas Hargreaves, the Whitechapel butcher, his strength enough to fell any victim, his apron always reeking of blood? Or Edgar Cole, the starving artist, sketching grotesque bodies until imagination spilled into reality? Or Lord Henry Ashcroft, the gentleman predator, cloaked in wealth, leaving behind cigars and scars in alleys no nobleman should tread? Each had motive. Each had shadow. Each left traces in the fog. So who was Jack? Perhaps it was one of them. Perhaps it was all of them. Or perhaps Jack was never a man, but the face of fear itself, stitched together by rumor, sharpened by ink, immortalized by panic. The detective once wrote, "Jack is not only a killer. Jack is a game. He leaves just enough to suspect all, and never enough to catch one. Jack wants us to doubt each other. Jack wants us to exhaust ourselves. Jack is suspicion made flesh. Now, the circle is yours. The name erased from the final page waits for your hand. Close your eyes. Imagine the fog, the wet cobblestones, the faint glow of a gas lamp in Buck's Row. Listen for the scrape of a boot, the flare of a match, the whisper of steel. And then answer, quietly, to yourself. Who was Jack? Because history cannot.